Thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. So, what do people think of your brand? Let's say on a scale of 1 to 5. You're not asking them even directly, they're just randomly considering your product or service, but they want a collection of reviews from people who often have expert knowledge of your brand. They've purchased the product or service that you're interested in marketing. You want to find a respectable review service to hear what verified consumers think of you. Consumer Affairs is one of those services, and the CEO of the company, Zac Carman, has created an environment of fair and balanced reporting that helps both brands and consumers understand each other. So let's listen to a Shark's 5-star review on the affairs of consumers with Consumer Affairs' Zac Carman on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. All right. Well, Zac, thank you again for joining us on A Shark's Perspective. I'm very pleased to bring you on the show, and I'd like you to kind of start out telling me a little bit about your background. I know you studied engineering and sculpture at Dartmouth, so the obvious transition was into an online reputation management company. Haha. Tell me a little
For
bit about
sure.
your background and how you progressed into this role.
Well, after school, I moved to the Bay Area and I worked in I started in engineering. I started sort of doing math modeling at IBM's hard drive division and, then was on a rotational program, kind of worked in consulting and worked in sales, after working in engineering for a couple of years. And I tried to start a company and that failed miserably. And kind of going through that experience, I realized either my idea was bad or I was bad or both. And so it probably made sense to get on the investing side of the table. And so I joined a small little startup private equity firm, growth equity firm that was focused on investing in sort of high growth companies that were bootstrap, profitable, and growing in big markets. That was sort of the financial profile. And so my job there was to cold call owners of companies and get to know them and essentially sell them money in exchange for part of their business and work with them then and help them grow their companies. And after doing that for a while, I realized sort of kind of the entrepreneurial itch got me, and I realized there was an interesting opportunity to acquire an asset and then go build a business. And I was really focused on, while investing, I was really focused on big picture trends and investing along sort of a trend. And I was fascinated with media, and I was fascinated with kind of the way marketing was changing in the context of sort of the expansion of the channels of information that consumers have, along with sort of the advent of technology to measure the efficacy of marketing. And, people call this performance marketing. And, marketers, my opinion is, marketers don't really care where a dollar's spent, whether that's spent in a newspaper or a billboard or on Google or Facebook. A marketer, in the end, cares about customer acquisition. And so in the context of that, I was, searching for, a media platform that would enable me to play along those trends. And so I cold called the founder of Consumer Affairs, who was a journalist. And his original concept was to crowdsource sources, consumers, who were having experiences with businesses and leverage that to find signal in the noise and write the original stories, break the stories about, in the beat of consumerism. But what he'd actually built was this huge portfolio of users that were sharing experiences with some of the most difficult purchases, because the commonality of what with a consumer will seek out to share their experiences that it was, either they didn't understand the purchase or it was really difficult or it was really emotional, good or bad. And that correlates really strongly with life change and the purchases consumers are making along that vector of life change. So whether that's moving across the country or aging in place or a new baby or dealing with a family issue, so these purchases are really hard, and consumers make them once in a lifetime, and because of that, the difficulty of the purchase is magnified. And in a performance marketing world, what you'd want to own is you'd want to own an asset where your job is to educate consumers on how to buy these really tough things and how to and leverage the voice of consumers, which really until the internet you weren't able to do that. Marketing was this monologue format that brands stood at podiums, and today consumers have a platform to stand on, be that social media or a platform like ConsumerAffairs. And in the context of that, the brands really should be engaging in the platform and solving those customer service issues and highlighting examples of where they've done a great job solving an issue, or how consumers can solve issues or experiences. And of course, marketers want referrals, and it happens that platform turns into a really great tool in the kit of managing your reputation. And brands have really had to pivot into proactively managing their reputation because the voice of the customer is now amplified across all these different platforms. And so that's sort of the story of how I got into it. Definitely a long journey from engineering and sculpture to reputation management and reviews and media.
Well, no, and it makes sense when you talk about algorithms early on in media, and I think probably that's sort of a natural affinity for a lot of tech startups like that. But also, I think probably one of your greatest lessons, when you agree, is what you said early on, is you had a massive failure. And I don't know of a successful marketer yet who hasn't had a massive failure that they've learned from tremendously and rebounded.
Yeah, failure. I mean, people talk about failing fast and failing often because those failures are what you learn from. And whether that's in hiring or building a functional team within the company or a technology failure or a marketing failure, you need, we are, our why as a business is we believe people should make data-driven decisions. And whether you're a brand or whether you're a consumer, we want to empower you with that data. And we embrace it internally. It's actually one of our core values is to be data-driven. And that's because unless you're measuring it, it's hard to learn from the failure.
Right. Well, so let's talk a little bit then about social proofing. I think what you were talking about really with giving the consumer a voice. I mean, it's companies like ConsumerAffairs, it's basically the ultimate referral engine on steroids. Hearing what others say. But why do you think that social proofing is so powerful, especially when you consider that a lot of the reviews, 99% of them, are not going to be from people necessarily If you're on Facebook and you get a Facebook group and you hear your 100 or so friends, whatever the number is, when you hear your friends talk about a product, that can be compelling. But it seems like a manifestation, a change in the market is the adoption so much of reviews, online reviews, from people that have no relation to you at all.
Yeah, we actually just did a big study on this about, what's important with reviews and, how are reviews trustworthy in the context of other forms of recommendations, be it an expert recommendation or a celebrity recommendation or the brand itself, right? I mean, brands stand up and tout themselves all day long. And how is influencer marketing impacting this? And what we found is that a recommendation from a friend is still better than a review, slightly. Like I think 91% versus 89% or something like this. So it's still more powerful if your friend has bought XYZ and is recommending it to you, but only marginally. But only marginally. And I think we've focused. This was something because though I'm the largest shareholder of Consumer Affairs, I have investors, and so when I was buying Consumer Affairs originally and acquiring the asset, that was a question I had to answer. Was, well, wait a second, what about this whole social media thing? And aren't people just going to turn to their friends for recommendations in the future rather than reading these online review things? And we've been intentional about the types of things that we focus on Consumer Affairs, because there are things that your friends probably are using right now, something that you buy frequently. Like I probably ask my friends, oh, do you guys like Kayak or Expedia better? Because people are booking travel all the time. And my friends may have context in that. But this is why we really focus on these singular life events, is because of all the things that your friends are going through, they're probably not going through this life change at the same time. Like when my mom fell and broke her hip and I needed to go through the purchase process on a walk-in bathtub, I probably wouldn't have been able to turn to my friends. And because of that, the experiences on our site, I think, are more valuable. But surprising is that those online reviews are almost as trusted as a good friend. And I think that it is, there's this perception that, I think good or bad, there's this perception that all reviews are equal. And this is something that I'm actually really honing in on and focusing on, because we've tried to err on one end of the spectrum of authenticity in reviews. But good or bad, I think consumers think like, oh, somebody took the time to share that experience, it's worthwhile.
Well, and that's a great point. I come from a big data background that did a lot of addressable targeting, and there are a lot of ways, through audience propensity type models to where you can target a customer. But when you talk about a life trigger event, your mom fell and now needs a tub. I mean, the first place you're going to go is not wait 6 months. You're going to go shopping, and where are you going to go to find that validation of what the product is? It's through reviews like you've got.
And expert. I mean, the other thing we had. I mean, I spent. When I bought Consumer Affairs, it was really tiny. We were 3 people, and I think we were getting right at 1 million visitors or just shy of it a month. Today we're about 280 people, and we get maybe 6.5, 7 million visitors a month. And I spent, the first couple of years, I'm a huge fan of Kayak. I love that product. And Kayak is this, this tool where you or I could go and spend $5,000 in 5 minutes buying a ticket to London and feeling like we did a really great job. And I was like, that's what we need to build for every single one of these categories. Because today we cover maybe 315, 320 categories of purchases. So for 2 years, I tried to build these sortable filtering engines for each of those types of purchases. And every purchase is, in essence, very similar, right? There's some number of brands that are a good fit for you, and there's some facets of comparison shopping. In travel, it's well known. It's cabin class and number of stops and departure city and takeoff time. And it wasn't me, but one of my employees, a good friend of mine, actually came in one day and he was like, Zac, we're idiots. These purchases are all singular, and people enter them without knowing a darn thing about them. And so you can't have a slider for takeoff time or the equivalent in whatever purchase if the consumer doesn't even know what takeoff time is. And similarly, like, how totally angry would you be if you bought an airline ticket to London and one was $5,200 and one was $5,000, and the one that's $5,000 has 5 stops, and leaves at 5 a.m., whereas you could have bought the one at $5,200 and left at 10 a.m. and it was direct. And so in 2013, that's when we started really investing. We hired a team of PhD researchers and started really investing in sort of that educational content on educating them just about the purchase. These are all those facets, and these are all those kind of vectors of comparison that you'd want to have when you're thinking about the purchase. And of course, customer voice and experience is part of that. And so that's something we've gone really, really long on, is the educational piece. And in fact, that's sort of where the technology piece of what we're doing right now is that we realized, with this new voice platform, the emergence of the voice platforms, and the fact that the average person who goes off on our site and then transacts has spent 49 minutes reading content on Consumer Affairs. We were like, God, that's a lot of work. What if we had kind of a matching engine where we asked people, kind of like going to the doctor, where you asked them, like, hey, like, what types of brands are you interested in? Have you bought from before? Or, where do you live? And, what are some of those, questions that you could ask someone that get at those, the answers to those comparison facets, and then matched them directly. And if you could do that in a couple minutes, and you became the trusted brand to do that, that would be great on voice platforms, and that would be great, a better user experience on ConsumerAffairs.com. So we've gone really long in building these matching tools and building the training sets of data to sort of understand how to match those consumers. That's something we're building still, but it turns out the training set's really hard to get at.
From a high level, what kind of advice do you give? What does your team give about how companies should interact with people who leave reviews, positive, negative, and middle of the road? I mean, what kind of interaction do you encourage?
I think it's like we actually sent out a really great book to all of our customers called A Complaint is a Gift. And in that book, it talks about, any feedback that you get from your customer is awesome. And you should treat it as if that customer gave you a gift. Because it is. It's a lens into, that person's perspective on their experience with your brand. And so, the first thing you do is you thank them. When you get a gift, what do? You say, thank you. Thank you for that feedback, because it allows us to improve our business in some way. And so that's sort of the lens, and that's a big, that's a very different thing than, certainly brands were used to treat online reviews. I think they were more adversarial. Certainly the negative ones, because it's hard to take that negative feedback. It's hard to look yourself in the mirror and be like, God, wow, we really failed that customer, or that experience, didn't live up to the promises that we, made. And so, I think that it's sort of saying, hey, thank you so much for this feedback, and then, provisioning that feedback. And I think a big thing that we're investing in as a business is the ability to derive operationalizable insights from all of this content. And how, as a business, do we take that feedback and, put action behind it? So, of course, like any individual feedback, you should, say thanks so much and try and solve that issue if there is an issue, or try and magnify it if it's a positive experience, either into the next purchase or an elongation of your lifetime value of a customer or additional social proof. But then across a spectrum of all of this content, how do you How do you glean insights and make business change or drive innovation in your business? And then I think another big tool set of opportunity is if you have access to these reviews, how do you as a marketer take those experiences and leverage them in your marketing? So this is another big, so what I think of an unheralded feature that we have in our product is the reviews API and the structuring of that API to be able to pull social proof content in a granular way into your marketing. And I think that that's really kind of the future of marketing is personalization of that social proof, or at least as it relates to reviews, the ability to leverage that content in a granular way to your personalized marketing.
So we talk about reviews a lot of times, like just now about, their current customers. They've purchased your product or service, they've left a review. But, I've seen you speak several times at conferences like LeadsCon, one of the leading lead generation conferences, which I think is incredibly smart because you don't see any other companies doing that, talking about, reputation management, online reputation management. And I'm in the belief heavily, having worked with a lot of brands in the past, either as in a client service role or as an employee, that reviews can dramatically affect sales. Can you talk a little bit about your interpretation of how reviews affect customer acquisition? Because a lot of those same reviews speak to the person doing the research, as we talked about earlier, looking at your potential product or service, and it can leave such a dramatic footprint, not necessarily for just that interaction with the brand, but to the people who are looking at the brand in the future.
Yeah, I think this is why, when I was looking at the types of media one might want to own, as, today, I think if you really teased it out, I think today, far less than 10% of marketing dollars are truly attributable to a customer acquisition event. So this so-called performance marketing and this sort of flight to measurability and understanding of efficacy of dollars is still in its first, maybe the first or second inning. And, in that context, what you would want to own is the content or the media that is most helpful to consumers in their research process. Because as media makes money from marketing dollars being spent, the flight will be to that performance. And so, it's like the newspaper industry, a third of their revenue was killed by Craigslist, a third of their revenue was killed just by the concept of the internet making content free. But then the other third was killed because there's no intent within a newsreader, right? That story about Stormy Daniels just has nothing to do with someone buying an F-150. The person who's thinking about buying an F-150 and therefore in the conversion funnel is the person reading reviews about an F-150 or reading a guide about, what are the things you need to know when you're buying a truck. And, that just makes customer voice supremely powerful. And in a world where the channels of information that a consumer has access to are magnificently large, the Dewey Decimal System was once upon a time good enough. The card catalog was good enough for me to go and find the information I needed in my research process. But as channels of information have proliferated, you need something like Google, or you need something like your newsfeed within Facebook to curate this fire hose of information that every consumer has access to. And so in that context, you would want to have reviews. And reviews are just, the data just has borne out that reviews are super helpful to people researching these purchases.
Well, I never thought we would shift, to having the next spokesperson for the F-150 is Stormy Daniels. So people at Ford are having
but this is why this is the opacity of marketing is what made magazines and newspapers so terrifically profitable. And as soon as technology manifest that demonstrated that, marketers fled. Um,
Isn't it amazing that 20 years ago you would have done everything you could to creatively make an ad for print or a TV ad or for radio, and that was your voice, and a lot of that almost becomes not irrelevant, but it is minimized when somebody goes to Google, starts looking up reviews on sites that deliver so much. I mean, it may be that the TV ad piques initial interest into doing the research, but people are going to do research, and it is a monumental shift to where they go to to companies like ConsumerAffairs.com and do research on why people bought and what their interaction was with a product. I find it amazing that shift has happened so quickly.
and I think even within TV, I mean, I think, you see businesses that sort of came out of nowhere, like Trivago. Trivago's business was really an attribution engine. I think they really understood the efficacy of their marketing. And you're able to today, with this new technology and measurability, build brands profitably. Like, for instance, we're embarking on TV. We've been doing a lot of tests in some of our life changes. And, for us, it's about fine tuning that measurability, because I think you can even do TV in a unit economic positive way and go and build a brand that way. And that's the way I think this is the way I think marketers will think about building brands. Like Gone, well, maybe not Gone, because it's only, 95% of marketing dollars are still spent in an opaque way. But, I think in the future, you won't have people spending dollars that are not directly measurable to ROI.
Agreed.
Because the technology will enable it.
So, Zach, where do you see, kind of where the market is evolving, and then also kind of on the back end, at least with consumer affairs, what are you most proud of in your accomplishments and your team's accomplishments in building out ConsumerAffairs.com?
I think that we're going to see more focus on transparency. So I think the market is going toward more transparency. The one manifestation is GDPR in the EU. Another is, just sort of the overall privacy issues in the U.S. And I think that consumers, the pendulum swung one way in terms of consumers not understanding their privacy. And so I think that that's one big pendulum that's going to swing. And I think the way that impacts, we've been on one end of the spectrum of disclosure and transparency to consumers. And in fact, we went to a place where, anonymity is gone on ConsumerAffairs.com. You're not able to write a review on ConsumerAffairs.com unless we're able to verify that you're a human and you're on the other end of the proverbial phone. And in fact, we have receipt data, and we know when people actually even buy products, because we think that that's even more helpful to users. And so I think the pendulum's going to swing that way. So I think that review sites that are about anonymity and review sites that sort of publish whatever piece of content are not long for this world. And I think also, review sites and advice sites that are not overtly transparent about their relationships and the economics of their relationships are going to go by the wayside as well. I think that that's sort of a general trend that I see. And then I think the thing I'm the most proud of at Consumer Affairs is, then we think about Net Promoter Score in everything we do. We think about the Net Promoter Score of our employees. We measure our employee Net Promoter Score. We measure the Net Promoter Score of our readership. We measure the Net Promoter Score of the referrals that we send off to partners. And, I think it's not the highest Net Promoter Score in the world, but the Net Promoter Score of a referral from ConsumerAffairs.com is 57. which is kind of bananas. Like that's really in a world of lead generators, which I don't even think of us necessarily as a lead gen business, but in a world where, I think if you ask the referral from some other traditional lead gen sources, those net promoter scores probably wouldn't be that high. So I'm super proud that, when we help a consumer through that research process and then they decide to reach out to an accredited member, that net promoter score is 57. So I'm super proud of that.
Well, Zac, I'm gonna close the show and let you know that I'm giving you 5-star review for being on today's episode and the content you've given. So,
well, thank you for that gift.
I appreciate it, and best of luck. So,
absolutely, thanks for having me.
So the reviews are in, and that was a good conversation with Zac Carman. 3 key takeaways for me. First, a complaint is a gift. Any feedback you get from a customer is a gift and should be treated that way. It's a lens into that person's perspective with your brand. Happy customers tell no one, but angry customers tell everyone. Will your brand take action based on what those customers are saying? Second, a recommendation from a friend is valued only slightly higher than what is seen on an online review site. That review is almost as trusted as if it came from a good friend. Think about it. If 500 people you didn't know gave a brand a 4 or 5-star review, for example, you'd tend to believe them. Third, online reviews can heavily affect your sales revenue. People researching ConsumerAffairs.com are looking at making a purchase. Consumers seek out social proof when making purchase decisions. They want to see that your product or service has worked for others before they risk trying it themselves. Got a question? Send an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our conversation regarding another one of the many components that makes up marketing today, and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.